Hey there, if you're watching my video for the first time, then do subscribe, and while you're at it, don't forget to hit the like button as well. With that out of the way, let's get started. In the winter of 1995, a New York Times correspondent visiting Afghanistan reported that after years of brutal civil strife, a big change seemed to be afoot. A new force of professed Islamic purists and Afghan patriots had quickly taken military control of more than 40% of the country. It was quite surprising, because up until taking arms, these fighters were religious puppets. In Pashto, the name Taliban means student, and that's what they like to refer themselves to. A quarter century later, after outlasting an international military coalition in a war that cost tens of thousands of lives, the one-time students are now the rulers of the land of Afghanistan. The Taliban arose in 1994 amid the turmoil that followed the withdrawal of Soviet forces from Afghanistan in 1989. The group was rooted in rural areas of Kandahar province in the country's ethnic Pashtun heartland in the south. The Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan in 1979 to set up a communist government, but eventually was driven out. The Soviets were defeated by the Islamic fighters known as Mujahideen, a patchwork of insurgent factions supported by the US government. Uncle Sam was happy to wage a proxy war against its Cold War rival, but the joy was short-lived, as various factions fell out and began fighting for control. The country fell into warlordism and a brutal civil war. Against this backdrop, the Taliban, with their promise to put Islamic values first and to battle the corruption that drove the warlords fighting, quickly attracted a following. Over months of intense fighting, they took over most of the country. In 1996, the Taliban declared Afghanistan as an Islamic emirate, imposing a harsh interpretation of Quran and enforcing it with brutal public punishments, including flogging, amputations, and mass executions. They also imposed strict restrictions over women, like keeping them out of schools. They also made clear that rival religious practices would not be tolerated. In early 2001, the Taliban destroyed towering statues known as the Great Buddhas of Bamiyan, objects of around the globe. The Taliban considered them blasphemous and bloated that their destruction was holy. There was a framework of a modern government, including ministries and bureaucracy, but at street level, it was a religious edict and the whim of individual commanders that dictated the everyday life for Afghans. They did not control the entire country, however. The north, where many of the Mujahideen commanders had taken up occupancy, remained a stronghold of resistance. The Taliban were founded in an ideology dictated that women should play only limited roles in society. The last time they ruled, they barred women and girls from taking most of the jobs or even going to school, and women caught outside the home with their faces uncovered risked severe punishment, including execution. Unmarried women and men seen together also faced their judgment. After the Taliban government was toppled by an American-led coalition, women made many gains in Afghanistan. But 2 decades later, as the US negotiated a troop withdrawal agreement with the Taliban, many Afghan women feared that all of that ground would be lost. And as the militants take power, there have been ample signs that those fears are well grounded. In just one example, Taliban fighters entered a bank in Kandahar during the fighting in July and ordered 9 women working there to leave and said that male relatives should take their place. and in a northern city of Kunduz, the city's new Taliban rules ordered women who had worked for government to leave their jobs and never return. When they were in power, the Taliban made Afghanistan a safe harbor for Osama bin Laden, a Saudi Arabia-born former Mujahideen fighter, while he built up a terrorist group named Al-Qaeda. On September 11, 2001, the group struck a blow that rattled the world, toppling the World Trade Center towers in New York and damaging the Pentagon in Washington. Thousands were killed. President George W. Bush demanded that Taliban should hand over Al-Qaeda and bin Laden. When Taliban refused, United States invaded Afghanistan, unleashing a heavy airstrike campaign and joined by former Mujahideen groups within the anti-Taliban Northern Alliance coalition. The US, with the help of its allies, soon toppled the Taliban. Most of Al-Qaeda and Taliban officials who survived fled to Pakistan. 20 years later, some of those Taliban officials were among the delegations that struck a deal for United States to leave Afghanistan, and they will number among the country's new rulers. With the shelter and assistance of Pakistan's military, the same force receiving heavy financial aid from United States to hunt down Al-Qaeda, the Taliban reformed as guerrilla insurgency. The US began pouring resources into a new war in Iraq, and American officials told the world that Afghanistan was well on its way to becoming a Western-style democracy with modern institutions. But many Afghans were coming to feel that those foreign institutions were just another way for corrupt leaders to steal their money. In the countryside, the Taliban began gaining ground and support, particularly in rural areas. Their numbers grew. Some fighters were intimidated into joining, others happy to volunteer. Almost all of them better paid than local policemen, and the group found a rich recruitment among the Afghan group in Pakistan, from families who had fled previously as refugees and were brought up in religious schools. The Taliban weathered the storm when President Barack Obama vastly expanded the US military presence in Afghanistan, up to around 1 lakh troops in 2010, and when Americans began drawing down a few years later, the insurgents began gaining ground again. It was a campaign of persistence, with Taliban betting that United States would eventually leave. They were right. More than 2,400 American soldiers dead, $2 trillion spent, and tens of thousands of Afghan civilians and security forces deaths later, President Donald Trump made a deal with Taliban and declared the American forces would leave Afghanistan by mid of 2021. President Biden endorsed the approach and presided over an uncompromising troop withdrawal, even as the Taliban began gobbling up the whole district and then cities. Just 9 days after Taliban seized their first provincial capital, the insurgents walked into the capital, Kabul. Taliban rule of Afghanistan has resumed. Taliban, after taking control after decades, claimed to rule without reprising and abuse. But the recent news of Afghanistan tells a different story. The early days of Taliban control have, in fact, seemed restrained in some places, but enough reports of brutality and intimidation have surfaced to send waves of refugees to Kabul ahead of group's advance. And thus, the capital's airport had become a scene of desperation and chaos, as thousands of Afghans try to flee the country at any cost. The Taliban leaders claim to uphold the Islamic law in Afghanistan and rebuild it under the name of Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan. What follows next is yet to uncover. That's all I had for this video. If you enjoyed, then drop a like, and if you like watching interesting videos like this one, then do subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon so that you're notified when I'm back again.